Welcome back to FYIdaho. I'm Elizabeth Allan Hodge, and my guests today are Representative Stephen Thayn from District 11 in the Idaho State Legislature, and Mr. Paul Venable, who is the chairman of the Constitutional Party of Idaho. We've been discussing entitlements and the fact that, according to your statistics, Stephen, we right now have unfunded liabilities that are now approaching $110 trillion.
You know, you'll find that entitlements are driving a lot of the costs in the federal budget, in the federal deficit, with 65% of every tax dollar going to entitlements. And with high taxation, you know, there's something to think about, and that is, how can the government guarantee unlimited benefits to its citizens? At some point, the only way it can do that is to have access, unlimited access, to the wealth of its citizens through taxation. At some point, you can only sustain a small number of people receiving benefits. If the majority of people ever require entitlements, the system's going to break. It's not sustainable.
And that's those unintended consequences.
Sure.
No matter how well-intended a program is, we can have unintended consequences that can be devastating.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it interesting that a lot of politicians, when they run for office, talk about reducing taxes. But when they don't link their talk of reducing taxes with controlling the cost of entitlements, I just think it's empty rhetoric. I don't see how they can accomplish it. In the Idaho Idaho budget, 85% of the general revenue goes to education and health and welfare. And you add in corrections and it gets up to 94%. And
you know what? That's a kind of an interesting thing, because over the years, of course, education is a concern to all of us. I support homeschooling, you know, private school. I support education, period. And one of the struggles that I think you hear people talk about is our Idaho state constitution provides mandates the public school system. And if it weren't mandated, you would say, well, that's definitely an entitlement. But now we've got it in our Constitution, so how do you deal with that?
Well, and that's a good question, but you know, in the earlier segment, we did talk about reforming public education, allowing students to finish in less time. So there are things that you can do to improve public education. In the past, we've been driven by the input theory of value, meaning the more money you spend on public education, somehow, miraculously, it's supposed to become better. Yeah. And we've taken a different approach, which I have to go back to that earlier segment and maybe pick up. But there is another point I'd like to make about our federal system and how entitlements are corrupting it. A federal system has certain responsibilities for the federal government. They're delegated to the federal government. Other responsibilities are reserved to the states, and other responsibilities are left for the people. The responsibility to deliver social services was left to the people. James Adams, who wrote the Constitution, said...
James Madison?
James Madison, yes. Okay. Thank you. Charity is no part of the legislative duty of government. And so what we're seeing is power is migrating to the federal government because they're taking responsibility from the people to provide social services. At some time in the future, we're going to have to take back that power from the federal government and give it back to the people, along with the money that goes with it. And what we're proposing is a method to do that, is strengthen the private sector, strengthen families, and we're starting with public education. And the reason you start with public education is it's a state-funded issue. All these other entitlements are federally funded issues and much more difficult to address. But when we have success based upon these principles of involving parents and strengthening that family unit, and we have success, then we can go and start applying that to other social issues.
So you're saying that by implementing this pilot program that you've got, this is one step toward reducing the entitlements?
One step toward controlling the costs. If you really think about it, we're going to have a certain amount of social services delivered in society. who's going to deliver it? Is it going to be the government, or is it going to be the private sector?
And how do you envision us actually weaning people from the government trough? Because that is a problem. You know, you stated it yourself, Paul. You said, you know, it's unsustainable. And as it continues to grow, and there are, you know, you can't keep putting more and more people into a system that's draining, you know, the lifeblood out of our economy.
Well, weaning is the appropriate word. It's not that you make a sudden stop. Okay? There's got to be a place where you start. And if we start now with something that we have control of, in the state like education, then we can begin to see something at work. Okay? And then we can begin to address some of the others more effectively.
And Elizabeth, there's another point that I think is fairly critical. We have thought about these issues a fair amount, and we do have some concrete ideas. However, we don't think it's wise to get too far ahead of the discussion. We want people to tell us if they think the government does a better job providing social services or the family. Once we have that determined, then we can have a more robust discussion.
And how are you getting feedback from people? How are you going about doing that? Are you planning some forums? Last year we did a forum with the transportation department relative to the cost cutting that was going on there. Are you proposing some kind of town hall meetings or forums that you'll be having?
That's one reason we came to talk to you.
Okay, all right.
That, and I do have a thesis that I've written that you can get on my website, ThaynForIdaho.com.
Okay.
So you can Google my name.
Would you spell that out?
Thayn, the number 4, Idaho.com.
All right, good, very good. So your thesis is?
The thesis is entitled Entitlements, Social Problems in the Family. How entitlements increase social problems by undermining the family. So first of all, we have to see that what we've been trying to do with our good intentions has actually been causing more harm than good. Once we make that recognition, then it's simple to say, okay, what can we do that will really fix these social problems and strengthen individuals by making them independent citizens?
I've got a quick question for you. Last year they were talking about mandating 4-year-olds starting school. And to me, that is a good example of good intentions that will have very detrimental unintended consequences. A 4-year-old who is not capable emotionally of leaving his mother or her mother being thrown into a situation that could be devastating and give them a bad taste in their mouth about education altogether, and that's unintended consequences. So the way you're going is just kind of the opposite. You're saying let them work at their own pace.
Let them work at their own pace. And
not too early.
And I've actually had quite a bit to do about the pre-kindergarten debate here in Idaho, and it'd be a fascinating discussion, but I think we're probably running out of time.
We are running out of time, and that will be fun for a future discussion. Meanwhile, if you have any questions, you can go to FYIdaho.com or ThaynForIdaho.com as well. I'm Elizabeth Allan Hodge. The program is FYIdaho.